me echoing?
No, I don't.
No. Okay. Right.
Okay, we are live.
Good evening and welcome everybody to Chai Chat and Community. My name is Naureen. I will be your host today. In case you're missing Saleha, she is controlling our strings in the background. And I am really pleased and privileged to be amongst a panel of my distinguished guests, who I will introduce in a moment. But before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the lands of the First Nations. We are meeting on many different lands. I am here on the Wurundjeri lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and to any Aboriginal elders who might be joining us tonight. So today we are tackling a pretty challenging and complex sort of an issue, which is pretty much an emerging issue in Australia. If we think about it, it's one of those isms that joins or that promotes sort of inequality in our social setups, and we are talking about casteism. And we want to understand what casteism is. So before we really take a deep dive into the subject, may I invite everyone to please say a few words about yourselves, and we'll start with Amina with in an alphabetical order. Why not?
Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. My name is Amina Rahimi and I am a lawyer, a practicing lawyer. I work with the Springvale Monash Legal Service. I practice in a range of different areas of law. So I'm a generalist lawyer, family violence, civil litigation, the list goes on, employment law. And beside that, I try to engage myself in community work with different organizations. Yep, so that's all about me. Thank you all.
Beautiful. Farhat, a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Naureen, and Women in G, everyone. That's the greeting, traditional owner's greeting, and I'm on the land of the Gurnai people. I work in the diversity and inclusion field, so and I work in Gippsland, which is part of Victoria, I guess the biggest geographical territory in Victoria, which is an interesting place, and I love where I am. I'm a bit of mature age or middle-aged sort of migrant. So I had a history in Pakistan. So I spent quite a lot of years working in Pakistan in non-profit sector, in domestic violence, in medias and communication advocacy. And here I think I'm kind of building on those skills. It took me a while to get back to where I would have liked at the when I went entered Australia, but I guess I'm building on that skill and doing a lot of work in the communications and strategic engagement around diversity and inclusion.
Lovely. Welcome. Karishma.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm joining from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and also pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So I'm a freelance journalist, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I cover a variety of issues like migration, diaspora issues, and even identity politics.
Beautiful. May I just quickly add that, Karishma, it was your paper in the ABC recently, which has gotten this panel together to talk about casteism. So thank you for writing that article.
More
Mudit.
so, sorry.
Yeah, sure.
No,
Go
just
ahead.
more so thank you to the people like Vikrant who shared their stories with me. So
Lovely. Lovely. Mudit, can we hear from you?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I am in Melbourne. on the land of one of the Kulin nations. I am also a master's research student at Monash University. Though my research is in studying cultural economy, uh, because of some personal circumstances, I also study Brahminism. And yeah, I have done extensive research, a lot of which has been published on a lot of I don't know, non-mainstream platforms, and I have spoken about it. And every chance I get, I do speak against that idea. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this panel and speaking to everyone, hearing everyone's thoughts on the same things.
Excellent. Welcome.
Oh, also,
And
sorry,
last,
I
yes.
am. Sorry, I'm actually from. I was born and brought up in Rajasthan, in the district of Udaipur, which is one of those districts where the population of indigenous people is over 45% in India. So I'm proud to have been raised in a land of indigenous people over there, which does not treat the indigenous people as well. So yeah, I think it's an important aspect that I would probably get to highlight today as well if I get the chance.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Look forward to hearing from you. Vikrant.
Yeah, hello all, and thanks for this particular panel and all the panelists for joining. I'm Vikrant Kishore, and to keep it short, I'm an academic and a filmmaker, and my research interests are in Indian cinema as well as intangible cultural heritage, where I make films and I talk about it. And mostly when it is intangible cultural heritage, I look mostly at the indigenous culture as well as the culture of the downtrodden in India. So that's to be as precise as possible. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I migrated to Australia in 2005. Wow, 15, 20, 16 years ago. But I am a perpetual migrant. I was born in Pakistan and I've kind of been country hopping since I was born. And my interest in this topic, I guess, is from the aspect of the migrant community, the diaspora from the subcontinent, and what are the issues that face us. I do work for women's empowerment in the migrant communities, and I am writing a research paper on the barriers faced by migrant women in accessing information about political systems in Australia. So that's how I sort of fit in. And of course, I'm a friend of Saleha, so that sort of brings me here on board as well. So let us begin with, I guess, the simple question: what is casteism? I say it's simple. I said simple, but it might not be as simple. The answer for to this question. So, Mudit, would you like to begin our conversation today about what exactly is casteism?
Yeah, so I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. But yeah, it is not a simple topic to discuss. We can start with a little history. The Indian subcontinent, before any of the other religions involved, the primordial religion in the subcontinent was the Vedic religion, uh, which essentially is about division. And the division is caste division. It divides people into three upper castes or oppressor castes, which are the warrior classes, the priest classes, and the business classes. And it puts majority of the people in working classes or shudras. And then there are people that it classifies as people without a caste, which were treated as untouchables. And of course, it has always treated indigenous people as savages. And yeah, that's pretty much the structure of casteism as it has been. But what I talked about are the varnas. Within the varnas, there were communities that evolved that became the castes. So within the Brahmin varna, there will be castes, and they will have their own traditions and uh, like ways of living their life. And But the biggest thing is that these will be endogamous communities, so the mixing of blood will be expressly forbidden, come what may. And this will happen to not just the upper varnas, it will be enforced on every single one. So communities within the lower varnas will also be forced to be endogamous, and it will become like a stratified hierarchy where everyone on top oppresses everyone at the bottom, and everyone below them. And yeah, the sanction for this comes from, like, right at the top, which is the religious sanction that this is how this society is structured. So yeah, anyone who says that caste is a British invention is like lying or does not know Indian history, because caste is as old as India is, and caste is what India's first religion was and continues to be India's religion. Indians take their caste with them wherever they go. Does not matter what faith they are a part of. Caste exists across Hinduism, across Islam, Sikhism. It might not be as apparent in other religion, but yeah, as and when we discuss it further, it will become more apparent. But yeah, this is the history of caste. But as we have come into contemporary times, it has taken more contemporary forms in terms of privilege getting more entrenched, the underprivileged getting more marginalized. And so yeah, let's unpack that.
Yep. So, Mudit, you spoke about casteism in the Hindu context. Can I throw the question out to maybe Vikrant about what kinds of casteism exist, I guess, across the globe in other cultures and other traditions? I know we were talking a little bit about a book that you've come across. So, if you can give us some context in outside of India, perhaps.
Okay. Well, it's a huge topic. There's lots of things to discuss around it. In fact, in the morning, I was just going through one of the articles on BBC, and it was about Sharon Osbourne being, kicked out of the CBS channel. And this issue was about, Sharon Osbourne and her particular discussion with this person, Cheryl Underwood. And it was about Sharon trying to defend Piers Morgan and his so-called, implied racism towards the royal. And you must be aware of that. I'm using it as a kind of a base to put forth my argument. And Sharon was unable to, explain that while defending Piers Morgan, she was not trying to defend racism, but in a way she came out like that, and that's why she was booted out. So, and in fact, there was this particular exchange between them. So, she said that I did not say anything racism, so how are you, even saying that to me? And Cheryl Underwood, in fact, she responded saying that it is not the exact word of racism, it is the implication and reaction to it. And I found that very, very strong, the implication and reaction to it. And when we talk about casteism in the Indian diaspora, lots of people say casteism doesn't exist. Well, I say it exists. And it exists in your implication and in your reaction, in how you behave, how you, in a way, how you, start negotiating and judging people or negotiating a relationship as well. So, it's always difficult to make people understand that there is casteism and why it is important that the implication of people's behavior, their choices and reaction while dealing with the issue of caste, or for that matter, any kind of discrimination, is important to be taken into account and talked about. And as you mentioned about Isabel Wilkerson, the author of the widely talked book called Caste. And that book on caste is not a book on caste on India, but it is a book on caste looking at the American society in relationship to the Nazis and Indian caste system. And again, a very powerful story out there. And what Wilkerson says, she says, caste elevates and empowers members of a dominant caste at the perpetual expense of a subordinate caste. And that is what is happening. So within Indian caste system also, there is subcaste also, which Mudit just referred. So within Brahmins also, there is subcaste of Brahmins. This is higher Brahmin, this is lower Brahmin, or higher Rajput, lower Rajput, higher Dalit, lower Dalit. So it is a very complex and complicated thing. But at the moment, I would rightly focus on the division between the upper caste and the lower caste, or the so-called untouchable communities. So-called, again, untouchable is something which is a punishable offense if you call someone untouchable or anyone. It's a derogatory term, but just for reference that how people perceive or have marginalized a section of people out there. So that there's lots of things, but again, I'll just refer to one more issue, and this is recently I read somewhere, and this was about some organizations talking about some issues in Indian community, and they said about that people who are talking about the issues of caste and dowry in Australia, you know, only in relation with Hinduism, is like their phantom imagination. And I was like, wow, is that the thing? Is that a certain, set of people think that these are phantom imagination? Of course you can say phantom imagination that it is just related to Hinduism. I know that it is there practiced in Christianity. There is Christian Dalits, there are Sikh Dalits, or there is Muslim Dalits. It is there. If you want to refer to that, then it's good. Then speak it out. But can't just say that it is phantom imagination. Dowry is not a phantom imagination. Caste is not a phantom imagination. And of course, there are laws within the Australian situation, Australian, legislation about dowry and how you treat women. But caste has not been discussed. While people talk about racism and the kind of problems they have about racism, they have not yet started talking about caste. So probably this, what Karishma did with her article, and many people felt offended, because the privilege they come from cannot accept that they are prejudiced, that they have certain issues. And I've got screenshots from so many places, from Indian groups and here and there, where they have been abusive. They have been totally, in a way, trying to brush aside that nothing happens, Indians are one and this and that. But sorry, that's why we are here talking about it. Maybe listen to us. Maybe we can have a dialogue, and maybe you will understand that this is a problem. Probably you have not questioned yourself. Maybe this is the time for you to do.
A very telling quote from you, Vikrant, in Karishma's article was, "Casteism follows us wherever we go." So wherever the Indian diaspora or the diaspora from the subcontinent is, we sort of carry that baggage with us. And I guess this kind of ties in really well with Karishma, your article. Tell us a little bit about how you were inspired to write that article. How did you find the people that you interviewed? And share some of the stories on your journey.
Sure. So the article actually its original form is a podcast, which is broadcasted out of ABC Radio National's Earshot. The article accompanied it, and the whole sort of premise for me going on this journey was to, well, I guess last year we saw Black Lives Matter really take off, and because I'm originally from Mumbai, I follow a lot of people and thinkers and influencers of various backgrounds in India as well. And they were just talking about how during that time, no one was really talking about the atrocities that people who are subjugated to the caste system face in India. And that just really made me remember the number of times people in Australia have asked me, "Oh, what's your caste?" or "Does the caste system exist?" And usually I used to respond with, "Oh, I don't know my caste because I never discussed it with my family," or "I guess the caste system still does exist." And so it was just that lack of clarity on my end where I was like, why do I have this lack of clarity in my life? Is it because obviously I'm privileged enough to leave India and come here, but is it deeper than that? Is it that my sort of background and lineage of being a Sindhi also ties in somewhere with the caste system? Mm-hmm. And how am I perpetuating it? So I pitched the idea for it to be sort of a journey of me understanding my privilege and what that means for the diaspora and the future of, I guess, people, Indians and South Asians. But I guess the most rewarding aspect of it was talking to people like Vikrant and Aparna and so many people like Kushal from Tasmania, who shared his story with me, and sort of all these little intricate stories of people who had the caste system impact their lives while they were in Australia. Something that each story surprised me as I listened to it, where I was like, I almost couldn't believe that this was still happening in Australia, that this was still something that people carried with them. And I really interviewed Vikrant towards the end of that journey. So he kind of really encapsulated so much of what we've been talking about how we're shocked that it's still happening. Why is it still happening? And also, yeah, questioning my privilege in that process. Because I think Vikrant also mentioned something about international students and how they often asked him, "Oh, does Australia do Indians in Australia experience racist attacks?" Because there was a spate of them in 2008 to 2012,
Yes.
and so. And I remember having that exact thought because my parents were like, your sister lives there, maybe you should go. And I was like, okay, maybe, but, I'm not sure. But I mean, let's give it a go. And so many of my friends also spoke to me about that. And when he told me that, it really hit me like a wave. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is exactly where I was in that journey at that time, because so much of it is ingrained for us to look beyond our backyard, but not in our backyard, and question what's going on, what are we perpetuating. But coming to the part of you saying how I found the stories, really through people, just talking to people in the community, through Deepak Joshi at THP, and just really just putting a word out there and saying, this is what I'm doing. Is there anyone who wants to share their story with me? And also just, not being pushy at all and saying, look, it's completely open to you if you want to participate. Let me know your terms and conditions of participating. I can be as, flexible as you need me to. And really, I found that to be a really helpful step for a topic like this, because most people either want to move forward from their experiences of discrimination, which is extremely fair, given that I don't want to make anyone relive their trauma as well. But also, some people were just like very happy to talk about it because it was time to do that.
Exactly. Lovely. Karishma, you spoke about, people you came across from sort of all parts of Australia. You spoke about Tasmania. I know there was a story from Queensland and New South Wales, Victoria. So I guess it is a widespread sort of practice, a behavior. Not exactly sure how to frame it. And when we look back at the subcontinent, one of the neighbors of India is Pakistan. So I'm going to try to weave this dialogue in with Farhat and her experiences of perhaps being exposed to a different kind of discrimination, maybe similar, but not. I'm not exactly sure if we can call it casteism. But Farhat, would you like to share some thoughts on this and how it might be practiced in Pakistan?
Thank you, Naureen, and really thankful for all of the speakers that were here before me and have talked about the different challenges that comes with that caste and identities related to that. In terms of my own experience, I guess I told you briefly, Naureen, before, I'm from a Shia background, so I'm within the majority Muslim Pakistan. I've got a I belong to this minority which is called Shia Muslims. That puts us in a bit of difficult spot. I'm not very honestly, I'm not that practicing either Shia or Sunni Muslim, but it's just the identity that I carry because I born into a certain family makes it quite different in terms of the experiences the other Muslims may have in my community, because with that identity comes several level of subjugation. So being a Shia Muslim woman, the intersectionality of this identity really puts us in a difficult spot. In terms of remembering the casteism from my childhood, after I talked to you, Naureen, I was reflecting on my early exposure to the casteism and how it was displaying around me. So I remember that I spent my early years with my grandparents, and it was a small suburban sort of town in city of Karachi. We had on our street someone living who repairs sofas for their living, so couches, and they were called sofa walas. So I don't know whether it makes any sense to you or not, but in Urdu, sofa wala means that, it's someone who does sofa repairs, and they live their life around that. There were people who were called sonars, and there were people who were called, lohewalas as well. So someone who works around the iron. And those things were my earliest experience of knowing people according to how they fit in the social scenario, so around their professions. But then when I went back to my mum's house, we had this gated community around a local industrial area. And we had this big labor class, which obviously came and went. But then we also had this particular colony or particular area where all the sweepers lived. And all those sweepers were mainly I remember they were from Hindu background. So in a Muslim country, they were all from Muslim Hindu background. And they would always, whenever I would see them around, they would have this big jharu on their shoulder, which they would be using to, sweep around the area. And it was really the cleanest area I think I've seen in those days in Karachi. They would come to my home and they would have separate utensils that were put around the water tank. And they would, be served whatever was cooked in the home. They would eat, they would wash their utensils, put them back there, and would go. They were really kind to us. And we, I guess my mum had this reputation of feeding people. So they would come and, eat. But that's my kind of earliest memory. But then when I was working in the family violence and, doing a bit of media work as well and media monitoring, I used to see these reports coming out of the interior Sindh where we would talk about the Megwars, or we would talk about, these Hindu families where there was forced conversion happening. And they always, even after the conversion, there would be instances where they would be recognized with their family name before they converted to Islam. And I think those were subtle things which I didn't, looked in perspective of casteism at that time. But I guess my lived experience of casteism, or in terms of the sectarian identity, was that being a Shia Muslim, there were a number of my cousin sisters who never got married, and they stayed unmarried all their lives because their push was to find them Shia Muslims, and not only Shia Muslims to get married, but from a certain with a certain family name. So if they were Naqvis, they will have to find Naqvis to get married if they were, within the Sayyids. So Sayyid is, I guess, a parallel of Brahmin caste within the Islam, and not maybe accepted by everyone, but the Sayyidism is actual. It really limits people who hold those identities, especially women, but also people outside of that identity. They see them as, more I don't know what's the right word, but bigger than themselves. Mm. So I remember from my early days, my sister told me that she visited Tar as part of election campaign supporting someone. And she said there were people who said, you say it, so you have to sit up and we will sit on the floor, and we wouldn't sit equally, and they will feed her and they will, take care of everything that she has to be done. So I guess these are some of the snippets that comes to my mind when I think about casteism, and they are maybe different demonstrations of casteism and how life is impacted and structured around those identities. In my own life, I got married to a Sunni Muslim, so that's another whole story, because a lot of people from my in-laws' family, they would say that maybe my marriage is not the right sort of marriage. I can tell you a small story. On the day I got married, my husband obviously booked a nikah or a spiritual person to come and get our nikah completed. And I had a Maulvi from my side, or a spiritual person or Islamic scholar from my side, because in Shias, you have to have two people who do the sighas, which is a dialogue between the two religious leaders. And his representative at the final moment said he can't go. And he said, why would you do that to me? I'm going and getting married today, and you're telling me you can't go and do my nikah. And he said, because you're marrying a Shia girl, and you didn't tell me that you're marrying a Shia girl, and that's not the right thing to do. You are not doing what's accepted within Sunni Muslim. I said, why? If she's a Muslim, she's, she's got parents who are marrying her off. What's the problem? I said, no, that can't happen because it's not something that you should do. It's not an accepted practice. And I've heard comments to the extent that maybe this is not a social contract that we should go into. So my marriage is nullified. It's not existent. So anything that comes out of that marriage is not legal as well. And that's kind of like, I think it's built around those concepts as well. So I'll stop at that. But these are, as I said, different snippets, which I didn't think very actively. But when you asked the question, I thought, okay, what it is, how it impacts me.
Exactly. Lovely. Before I go to Amina, Mudit, is that something you can sort of, were you able to gather some of the thoughts that Farhat has shared with us and relate them to your experiences or the research you've done? Especially, I'm thinking about in terms of the last names or sort of relationship building. Is that something that comes up in your research as well?
I mean, so first about caste in Islam, especially. So Sayyidism is real. It is a caste. It is primarily practiced in the Indian subcontinent. The Sayyids are considered the priest classes, and people who came and conquered India, especially or the subcontinent, are considered ashrafs. And people who they converted are considered as ajlafs, which is an even lower caste. And people who were untouchables in the Indian society, who converted to Islam, were considered arzals. So yeah, this is the basic stratification within Islam. There have been activists who have created movements around working class Muslim identity. So a sofa wala is probably a representative example, but working castes in Islam are, in India especially, politically they're termed as pasmandas, and they have political parties that are organized around the rights of pasmandas. They considered themselves OBCs, which is a constitutional term that I'll come later to, maybe later in the discussion. But in terms of something even Karishma mentioned was that a lot of people deny their caste, saying that they don't know what caste they are from, which is, again, I don't know, it's a little stupid, for the lack of a better word, because if you are from an upper caste, which is either you are a Brahmin or you are a Kshatriya or you are a Vaishya, which is the business classes. Kshatriyas are the warrior classes. I mean, they're now all like upper castes, all three of these. Incidentally, they only make up less than 15% of India's population. So if you have friends that are from Kshatriya caste or Brahmin caste or Baniyas, which is the replacement word for Vaishyas now, and you only have friends with these people, you are friends with, your friends are representative of less than 15% of India. So yeah, but yeah, if you are from these castes, you have insane privilege. You have grown up going to private schools and the best of colleges. You can speak the language of pseudo sophistication that is considered good education in India, and across, even in Pakistan, that's true. Like, English is spoken by a very small section of the society, both in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. And yeah, so all private jobs are basically cornered by these people. There are no reservation in private jobs for anyone. So it is mostly these people. And so when someone says that they don't know what caste they are from, it is stupid, because they have amassed so much privilege generationally, whereas even if they can't tell, someone else can easily tell their caste from their surname. So if someone asks me what my name is, it is Vyas, which is a Brahmin surname, and I am from an oppressor caste, which is the primary reason I study it, because I think Suraj Yengre came up with a good term for it. He called it as the, like, people who study their own prejudice need to be suicide bombers, to break up the caste system. Otherwise, there's no better way of doing it. There is no way of breaking up caste, because even if I say I don't know what my caste is, someone else will know the surname and know that, okay, this person is a Brahmin. So, okay, maybe they have a certain background, that they will look at me in a different way. And it is very, very problematic. So this needs to be broken. And I guess this discussion is a good place where we're starting, especially in the diaspora. But yeah, I think more radical discussions need to happen around this. Okay, I had
Mudit,
no idea. Yeah.
my uncle always used to tell me that change has to come from within. So I think you're a really great example of that. We haven't heard from one of our panelists yet. So we've talked about casteism and we've touched a little bit about inter-sectarian sort of discrimination that happens in Pakistan, and of course the caste system that is subtle but sort of in your face. Nobody talks about it in Pakistan as well. Amina, I would like to ask you. I guess y- I'm trying to sort of frame the question very delicately. I understand that within the Hazara community or within the Afghani community, there is an element of ethnic discrimination based on ethnic identity. Would you like to speak a little bit about that, and also maybe for the benefit of our viewers, present the context of whether that happens in Australia as well?
Yeah, sure. And just before I talk about that, I would like to mention something about Sayyids and Sayyidism. So my husband is actually a Sayyid. And when I got married to him, so someone in our community actually gave me advice that I should never disrespect him. And I was like, why? He's like, he is Sayyid. You can never disagree with the Sayyid. You can never do this or you can never do that because they are descendants of the Prophet. And I'm like, well, we are all we are all human beings. And that's what, and actually the Prophet says in his last sermon, he said that no Arab has superiority over a non-Arab and no non-Arab has superiority over an Arab. And what distinguishes human beings are based on their personal righteousness or piety. So it's not who you are, but unfortunately, we human beings, we have just created this notion for ourselves, these notions of superiority, which if we see deep inside it in Islam, it's not there, but we have created it. But in any event, now coming to ethnicity in Afghanistan, we do have major ethnicity issues. In our national anthem, 14 different ethnicities are mentioned. So only in our national anthem. But apart from that, there are many more which are not mentioned and which are very minor, like only a couple of maybe 1,000 people around. But the four main ethnicities that we have are the Pashtuns, Tajiks, Uzbeks, and Hazaras. And one thing that I came across is that it has been nearly about 30 to 40 years that there has been no proper census. So no one actually knows what the ratio of these different ethnicities are, but it is presumed that Pashtuns are the majority, and they claim themselves to be the real Afghans. And then the Tajiks and the Uzbeks and Hazara says, no, Pashtuns are not the real Afghans because they have migrated hundreds or thousands of years ago. They have migrated from Israel and they are descendants of the Jews. So they are not the real Afghans. We are the real Afghans. So it's always there has been fights. There has been, there is discrimination. Like I have seen it when actually talking about the Hazaras. So when I used to visit Afghanistan and my dad used to work there. So usually the working, people would take the Hazaras as the maids in the house in a kind of discriminatory way. But what I would see it as that they were very determined people. They would always do anything, in terms of they would be always willing to earn money for themselves and do the hard work in a positive way. But unfortunately, the other people would see it in a more negative way. And we did have a Hazara maid, and actually my mom would make me sit in the back of the car, and my mom would make the maid sit with her, because she would say, I don't want her to feel that she's different from us, because she's not. She's the same human being as we are. And that's how our whole brought up was, that we never thought that we are any different from Pashtun or Tajik or Hazaras. My husband is a Pashtun, and when we came to Australia, so that's when I actually saw the, the whole ethnicity issues, like, from a deeper lens. Because when we were getting married, like the Pashtun community came to my father-in-law's house, asking him why they are not taking a Pashtun girl for their son, because I'm a Tajik. And the Tajik sort of side of Afghans in Melbourne, in the community, they came to my dad saying he shouldn't be giving his daughter to a Pashtun. And then my sister ended up marrying a Pashtun, and now my another sister is engaged to a Pashtun, and my brother's wife is a Pashtun. And there are a few families that has cut off ties with us because of this reason.
Wow.
Yeah, they have. And they do spread this thing that, oh, my dad, like they refer to my dad, oh, Rahimi has, like, he has done all his rishta, or like, relationships with the Pashtuns, and he has abandoned the Tajiks. But for us, we are all same. Like, we have never thought about it. And in fact, there was one other person in Melbourne who wouldn't go buy meat from a shop because that shop, the Hazara owns that shop. And he would say, no, I would go buy from an Arab rather than buying from a Hazara.
Goodness me. Yeah. So it's all
It
happening
is
around us.
deeply, yeah, it is deeply entrenched in the community. And same like Indians, no matter where we go, our ethnicity comes with us because it is in our names. Rahimi, my last name, that's usually a Hazara last name, but for some reason it's also my last name. And also with the Pashtuns, they have a specific surnames that usually ends with ZAI, most of them, not all of them. So just someone saying their surname, one can like see from which ethnicity they come from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. We are talking about layers upon layers of identity and how it unfolds and plays in our lives. And it's a revelation to me, hearing from all of you. Look, I'm mindful of the time. It's kind of fleeting us. I would like to discuss, and I throw this question to all of you, and I think we can go around in a circle about what are the next steps? How do we break? I mean, you all are change makers. You're all sort of influencers within your own circles. So that is one way of creating change. What are other steps that we need to take? What is our message tonight to those who are watching? What do we need to do to I guess raise awareness, but also raising awareness is not enough. We need to eliminate all forms of discrimination. So what are we going to do about it? So let me start with Vikrant.
Well, there are lots of things. Firstly, uh, identifying people who are caste curious and telling them that if they are caste curious, then they have a certain prejudice. Okay, it's not about just forming friendship on the basis of caste, but it is about that they have a prejudice. The other day, after Karishma's particular report, and I was talking about caste issues and another forum, and a friend of mine asked me, were you discriminated, or I hope you are not impacted by this? I said, listen, I'm talking at a wider level. You are talking in terms of personal thing. So you better come and have a chat with me. But did you ask that question to yourself? Or, these are the kind of things, are you questioning your own things before asking if somebody, is being impacted? Are you? So I just found it to be a very kind of a narrow understanding of the discussion. And I really feel that, firstly, if people are talking about racism, or if they want to create issues around racism, or they want to take benefit because of race issues, okay, talk about your caste prejudices. That's where it starts. So do not deny it. You have to accept that there is a problem. You cannot go on talking about the privileges that you have and then also seek further privileges in the name of race and racism. That's not done. So probably there's lots of work, and that as a community we need to accept and we need to talk about, especially as a community. And I'm also appalled. I'm appalled by lots of our community members. Like once I talked about the issues that the aborigines and aboriginals in Australia face, and one person simply said, oh, they are none of my concern and I'm not aware of it. I have not come across any aboriginals, so it doesn't concern me. And I was taken aback. I said, you want to be a citizen of this country, you want to get the best out of this country, and you want to totally not acknowledge the issues that aboriginals face or talk about it. And then these are the people who want to have their caste privileges and want to discriminate on the basis of caste, while again talking not at all about the aboriginals as well. So there are, like today, I really find it a fantastic forum that we are not just talking about the Indian caste system, but also the parallels within the subcontinent. And this is a good start, because everybody thinks that, oh, people trying
It's
to
someone
target
else's
us
problem.
because we are from the Hindu community, they are trying to target. But today what we are doing is looking at every community and looking at the problem at a much wider level. And probably this is what is needed. And we need to question, the introspection needs to begin. We need to question ourselves and our own prejudices. That's what I just like my
Vikrant, you're
final.
asking us to really look inwards and question our own double standards, and that is the first step towards making a change. And it's hard. It's not an easy path, but we are. If we look inwards, there's unconscious bias against so many different identities, and we're not even aware of them.
Yeah,
So
and
yes,
can I add, Noreen? And there's
yes,
another thing which is happening in the community is the display of caste pride by celebrating their caste and caste related things. I'm not against that. Okay, I'm totally, if you want to celebrate your culture and a culture within the caste, that's fine. But a kind of a privilege, and that the display of your privileges and display of your caste pride to put down others, or to show that you were the top people and you are still the top people, and that kind of mindset and that kind of unabashed kind of a display, it really
mm,
bothers me, because it will never get you out of that kind of
yeah.
mindset.
Lovely, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Vikrant. Karishma, can I ask you to share some of the perhaps the people you spoke to who have the lived experience of being from a lower caste? And I don't, I would never use that term lightly. Um, what are their messages to people who are from upper caste? What if they had to, you know, say something to people who don't understand what they go through? What would it be?
So that was a question I asked almost everyone I spoke to.
Oh, lovely. Good.
And one that really stood out to me was by someone named Sun Kumar, who the article mentions. And Sun Kumar says that the fact that people from, again, not that this word is used lightly, but um, someone from a lower caste is not allowed to enter some other upper caste person's house, um, is very telling when they let animals, dogs, cats, and any other kind of being into their home, but they will not let someone from a lower caste into their home. And it's like, it really makes you question why. Because usually you're just like, you can observe it and be like, okay, that's someone's personal choice. But when you really question these little nuances of it, it makes you really understand the psyche on that end of the spectrum. So I think that was one that really stood out
Yes.
to me.
It's yes. I mean, you're speaking along the same lines as Vikrant. You know, the double standards that we have. We'll embrace pets into our homes, but another human being might not be part of our household environment. So that's it's confronting to hear those words.
And it's,
Yeah, sure. Please
sorry,
continue.
it's very much like Amina said, where you're taking people or viewing people and beings at an unequal level when you start off. And really, even if we talk about race, even if we talk about caste or any sort of discriminatory practice, the basis of it is not viewing someone or a being equally. And double standards in these sorts of issues exist almost 99% of the time.
Yep, it's the power imbalance that it creates, or puts another person in a position of privilege over another. Mudit, would you like to speak about some of the findings that have come out of your research so far, sort of tying into a concluding remarks as well from you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll keep this short, but I will like talk about the statistics. I did like drop a hint earlier about how the upper caste, or like the twice borns, like they like to call themselves in the Vedas, are just 15% of the population. That is true not just for Hindus. That is also true for castes in Islam. So Islam in the subcontinent, upper castes are only 15% of the population. So the rest of the 85% of Islamic population, especially in India, is working castes and considered lower castes. So yeah, there is a heavy hand of endogamy that works, where Sayyids will only marry Sayyids, Pathans will try and marry only Pathans, and Ashrafs will only marry Ashrafs. And that's a big thing. It is very rampant, especially in Hinduism. You can see it in matrimonial ads, or like that is the most obvious form of it. But yeah, you can see it in Hindu festivals, and like who, like for example in Ganesh Chaturthi, there are pandals which are named after castes. A particular caste will have their own pandals. There are Durga Puja pandals which will be named after a particular caste, like okay, this pandal's this caste and they have collected money to have this. And so yeah, so that's just one of the things. In terms of the violence that is literally inflicted, so I urge everyone to go and read up the Prevention of Atrocities Act. It is a very, very important legislation that India has. It protects the rights of Adivasis and Dalits. So scheduled castes. Scheduled castes is a constitutional term for Dalits, and scheduled tribes is a constitutional term for Adivasis and nomadic tribes and denotified tribes, which were notified as criminal by the British at some point.
Goodness.
These are called scheduled tribes. There is such an ancient culture of humiliating violence against these castes that there had to be a law that needed to be created, which had to document how this violence is inflicted. So like it is documented point by point that this practice is violence against Dalits and Adivasis. This practice, so like gory violence, and it's there, like it is written in the language of the law. So everyone needs to read that law, or at least know about it. It is very, very important. Less than 30% of cases that are registered under that law are prosecuted in India. So it is not working as it is because our judiciary is upper caste. There are no reservations in the judiciary, and it selects its judges by a collegiate system and not a merit-based system.
Yeah. And there is a push for diluting these particular
laws as well.
Atrocities Acts since the time, things have been changing a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, so I keep talking about how upper caste are 15%. I'll break down the rest of the 85% as well. Adivasis make up, scheduled tribes make up over 9% of India's population. That's 130 million people. That's 5 times Australia's population. That is just the indigenous population of India. Dalits make up over 16% of India's population. That is almost 210 million people, 21 crores. And the representation levels are so low, the literacy levels are so low, but nobody seems to understand why we need reservation. Everybody thinks that it is a poverty alleviation program. It is not. It is a representation policy which means someone who's educated, especially who's gained some privilege, especially those kind of people from these communities need to be represented in upper echelons of the society. So when someone says, okay, you are rich now, you have gained financial privilege, why do you need reservation now? Because we need those kind of people from these communities in upper echelons, because they do not exist. While the Indian government right now is trying to has actually removed reservation from promotions in public jobs. Also, reservation only exists in public jobs and public education, so it is less than 5% of all jobs anyway in India. So yeah.
So are you giving us a hopeful message or not a very hopeful message?
Yeah, so I mean, I want to address, and in conclusion, I want to address the elephant in the room, which is Hindutva, which we haven't talked about. But Hindutva is, ideally, when people talk about it and say it is okay, they say that it is a unifying policy or ideology that is trying to bring all Hindus at least under one banner. It is not. I'll give you just one logic for why it is not, because its leadership is all upper caste. The term was coined by an upper caste person called Savarkar. They learned a lot of their, and this is all documented, a lot of their leadership went to Nazi Germany and interacted with Nazi Germany and then documented the philosophies of Hindutva. So yeah, and they want to go back to the Vedic phase of living, which is quite apparent. We decry it, we make fun of it, we make a lot of fun of all the kind of things that a lot of the ministers from the current dispensation speak in the parliament about how this ancient technology existed in Vedic times. I mean, it is not funny. They're doing exactly what the system has been designed to do. Hindutva has come to power by saying that they want to unite everyone, when actually what they want to do is to go back to Vedic Hinduism, which will stratify the which will stratify the Indian society again, or at least reinforce the stratification that currently exists. And yeah, Sanatan Dharma and Hindutva do have a lot of stuff in common. I think there was a question then. And yeah, domestic violence is also religiously sanctioned. I mean, it's religiously sanctioned in all religions. I've read a lot of books where domestic violence is okay, or sometimes it's condoned as well. And we need to see domestic violence in the diaspora from that lens as well, from the caste lens, that why it's okay for men to be a certain way, how they come here but they go back to their home country to find a bride who's from their caste, who has very little agency when she comes here, and so has to face the violence and can't really do anything about it. So yeah, that needs to be addressed as well. But I guess that's about it.
You've opened a Pandora's box, Mudit. I tried to wrap this up, but but that's good. I mean, we are seeing that issues are interlinked, they're interwoven. There's no one solution that fits all the problems, so this is amazing that we are talking about this. I'm really glad that we have gender representation tonight, ethnic representation, faith representation. So these are the kinds of conversations we need to continue having. Farhat, can I ask you for your closing thoughts on how can we address the issues of perhaps discrimination in our families, in our societies, in our communities, and perhaps from a Pakistani lens?
I would say I'm a great believer in history and knowing our history. It's not, I'm a student, so I don't claim to be an expert in history, but what I'm learning by looking at history from an open mind and from a plural scientific mind is that there is a lot to be acknowledged, a lot to be, taken into account when we think about who we are today. So, when we talk about race and, the image that comes to mind is obviously the Africans in America, so Atlantic. slavery and, the slavery trade. We don't talk about the slavery within the Indian Muslim context and how they, supported and they kind of created those pathways for the slavery to be promoted as a trade within our subcontinent, throughout the, the other slave trade routes. I do think that we need to really take a good look at what has happened in last so many centuries, and think about our responsibility, acknowledge our privilege, and then operate from that position. So when I think about me being Sayed, I think I need to take the responsibility of those who came. I'm not even sure whether that's the right family history. Someone must have created and someone must have documented that family history. But if I am who I claim to be, then I need to take responsibility of what happened. And I guess that's really a point to consider for every one of us, that we acknowledge what has gone on and then take a step forward from that position, because without the history, we wouldn't be able to correct our future. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a lovely message. Amina, you are a lawyer. Would you like to perhaps speak about what we've been talking about in terms of human rights and frame it in that sort of lens?
Well, of course, on the face of it, it's no human. I mean, no law would allow discrimination on such basis. Yes, in the Australian law, caste, I haven't come across as caste being mentioned as one of the attributes for discrimination. But still, it doesn't mean that we have the right to discriminate someone else based on what caste they come from or what ethnicity they come from or whether they are a Sayed or not a Sayed. I mean, just as a human being, we thinking about it, like if we think about it, have a deep think, we know it inside that it's wrong to kind of subjugate one person because of how they are or where they come from. And my message to people would be to speak up. I know speaking up has a lot of consequences for those who does. And my message for those who don't speak up is that if you can't say a word of support, or if you can't support someone who actually stands up and speaks against these things, then don't disparage them as well, or don't I mean, the person who doesn't support, maybe most of them, from my experience that I have talked to them, they know it's wrong, but they don't have the courage. They're fearful of being judged, that they don't come up. So that's why they just mingle with the rest and say, oh, why did you say this? Why did you stand up against your own community? I mean, standing up against your own community shouldn't be something which you fear about if you know that your community is doing something wrong. Wrong is wrong. Doesn't matter from which community it comes. So I say this for my community. I know I will face the repercussions of talking so openly. And actually, I was told by a good friend of mine that I should be careful and not be too open. But I say what I believe in. If something is wrong, it's wrong. What is the word? Discriminating someone based on their ethnicity or caste shouldn't be done, especially in these countries. Any country, but especially in here.
So, Amina, I know that speaking up, yes. Should we give some avenues to our viewers on where they can report, or what kind of organizations are out there that can receive these kinds of complaints from people who are discriminated?
For discrimination, there are there is the Victorian Human Rights Victorian
Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission.
Discrimination is dealt by both federal and state, and there are like the legislation is kind of covers different similar attributes, but the tests that apply are different. So depending on the sort of discrimination it is, people can go to either towards the federal avenue or to the state avenue.
Lovely. What we'll do is we'll put the contacts of both these organizations in the chat or the Facebook
Yeah, and
post.
the websites are very self-explanatory. I don't practice in the discrimination area of law, but it's just out of curiosity, because studying here and wearing a hijab, I have come across many incidences. Like, I was spat at, I was called filthy Muslim, there were different scenarios. So that's why I have done my own research. So it's not that as a lawyer I know that area, it's just that from my own research I know it.
Lovely. Now, I know some of you have to leave at 9, but I've kind of posed questions to you up till now. I would like to leave, leave the platform open to any last sort of pressing comments that you might have that we haven't perhaps touched on, and you will not be able to sleep if you don't speak about them. So please, the floor is now open, and it's up to you on how you want to conclude. Vikrant, I know you always have something to say.
Yeah. No, I think like just to wrap it up. Firstly, I was I really feel privileged to have heard Amina and Farhat's point of view. We have been talking about the Indian situation for long, but across the border or from the subcontinent, those kind of voice and this kind of discussion was much required. And of course, Mudit and Karishma's insight was very insightful as well. And most importantly, while we are aware of these discriminations happening in our parent country, what is most important for us to start acknowledging and start talking about is that these prejudices should be challenged, and these kind of any kind of things that we hear or we get to know should also be brought to attention. Lots of times people just take it for granted that in diaspora, because the majority comes from the privileged communities and privileged class, that the underprivileged are also a bit fearful about coming out. And that this is one thing I've noticed. Lots of people from lower ranks or so-called lower ranks would not even want to talk about their caste, or in a way the past caste. So while there are people caste curious, they are always curious about who they can mingle with within of their own community and caste. And this is a problem. And earlier, because our first and second generation, probably till early 2010s, we were struggling to find a foothold in this country. People were more concerned about their own jobs and finding their foothold in this country. After that, now it's a settled, somewhat majority, or a kind of a sizable amount population of the community is settled here. Now they can look towards their own well-being and celebrating their own culture and their own things which they had missed for long because they were struggling. But then that also brings in the biases that they would practice, and they would become open to those. So as I mentioned, and as someone as well, I think Deepak just wrote a kind of a message in our chat about how caste-based groups have become rampant, and ugliness of caste and racial division is the ugliness that we are finding. So people are flaunting their caste superiority, which Deepak is mentioning, and these are things to take note. That okay, our a particular first two generations or the newcomers which were struggling about talking about themselves or their livelihood, now it has gone beyond that. And this is in next 10 years, these will be the issues that we need to be really talking about and taking care of each other as well.
Lovely, beautiful.
I'd like to add one thing. I didn't speak at all about another legislation in India that was first instituted in 1953. It was called the Backward Classes Commission. It was done by a Marathi man, Mr. Kalelkar, but it wasn't implemented by Nehru. It was done again by Indira Gandhi in 1980. It was called the backward classes commission, but this time it was done by a man from a backward class, Mr. B.P. Mandal. And I'm sure everyone's heard the name of Mandal Commission, but the real name of the commission was the Backward Classes Commission. So I've spoken about how scheduled castes or Dalits have 16% of the population, and Adivasis and tribals are 9% of India's population. That's 25%. Over 50% of India's population is this constitutional term called OBCs, or other backward classes. They also are entitled to, even not 52%, they are entitled to 27% reservation in all public jobs and education in India. Since Indira Gandhi also did not implement the commission, the reservation, it had to be implemented by a third front government in 1990 under VP Singh. But even then, it was only implemented in jobs. In education, it was implemented in 2006. So imagine a scheduled caste person or an Adivasi person got reservation in 1951, but for another 55 years, we had no reservation for people who were forever forced to be working class, or Shudras, the lowest caste in the hierarchy. It is abominable that now the government, it's only been 15 years that these reservations have been in place, especially in education, and the government is already rolling it back. So it is quite apparent that the government's, this current dispensation stance for against is a very anti-reservation stance. And I keep saying that you need people, you need reservation, because you need people who can speak the language of the oppressor. So especially people with more privilege need more reservation from those communities till we have equal representation. You can't, 15% of the people still have access to over 51% of all seats in jobs and education. I'm talking about upper caste people. And yet they talk about how they are losing out on opportunities. Like, you already have more than thrice what your representation should be. And it's really, really bad. And look at the education now. The new NCERT syllabus is completely filled with mythology. Nobody's talking about it. Like, it was released last year, India's education syllabus. It was last month, sorry. So
just going back to your point, Mudit, about the like reservation, as you're calling it, that's a conversation that happens in so many domains about the quota system. Why do we need to put, these representational ratios in every place that we go? And it's a hot debate here in Australia as well. I would like to hear more about that. What do you think? How do we, when there is an argument around that quota system or reservations, how do we approach it in a way which is, I guess, politically correct, but still makes the point what you're saying here?
I mean, we need to be proud of it. It's a progressive policy unparalleled in the world. I mean, South Africa has it, but it is still facing a lot of backlash from a very minority white community, which is very privileged.
The reason I'm saying that, sorry, Mudit, I should maybe clarify that point, because a lot of women, and I'm talking about the women representation here, a lot of women themselves think that if they come on quota or representational seats, maybe that's going against their merit. And I feel a bit puzzled at that when a woman or when a young woman says to me, I don't want that, because that's kind of like telling me I'm not sufficient enough in my own skin. So that's where I'm going to lead. And I know there might be different responses to both situations, but I do see parallels as well.
Yeah, I'm going to address this with just the unpacking of the word merit. What is merit? We largely have been brought up to think that merit is an entrance criteria. You deserve something if you merit it. That's not true. Merit is an exit criteria. Entrance criteria is always reservation. When you go into a job, you perform the same duties as any other person's performing, and that is when your merit applies. When you go into a college, you are giving the same exams as anyone else is giving. So merit is an exit criteria or a performance criteria. Always has been, always will be. Entrance criteria is always representation. It is never ever merit. Like, entrance criteria.
Fantastic argument for you, Farhat. Use it.
I love it. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
So you need equal numbers. You need people who can't speak the oppressor's language, and if you don't have representation, then you can't dismantle the system that is leading to the skewed demographics. So yeah.
I have a question just following up on that, because it reminded me of so much about just how we get into these spaces of professional work. And also because I agree, quotas are definitely a good solution to a lot of issues. But I'm just wondering, how does that interact with influence? Because I know in India, so many things are done by knowing people, by being well connected, by getting a job because you know someone. And that sort of connection is so important to get into the job of your dreams for some people. So how does that play into with the whole notion of, I guess you also said that there's the issue of it's mostly a public institution enforced thing, but just generally, how does it play together?
Now, I think the keyword you're looking for is networking. Networking, right? Yeah. Networking is complex, yeah. And networking plays on a lot. It mostly plays on identities. So, yeah, it is very layered, of course. For example, I'll unpack your identity, which is Sindhi, which is a linguistic identity or a regional identity, and Hindu, which is a faith-based identity. But then your caste identity, Luthria, is Khatri, and or Kshatriya, and your gender identity is women. And inadvertently, whatever space you go into, private or public education or jobs, you end up, not you, but one ends up flocking with people who think like them, speak like them. And if you have been raised in a tradition where societies have always been divided based on the idea that bloods should not mix, you develop thought processes that are very, very siloed anyway. So when you go into a space, you end up entering the same silos that you've always been in. So yeah, that's what reservation does. It breaks that. When someone from an oppressed community, but with financial privilege now, and maybe cultural privilege in terms of being able to speak English, enters this space, it creates a role model for someone who's going to enter the same space in the future. Someone who speaks a different language, who breaks traditions because traditions have been defined by upper caste, mostly Brahmins. Yeah. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, but that also creates another problem of, and this is in relation with lots of Dalits in India who got reservation, who got you know empowered in lots of powerful positions in politics and academia, or in but they never they turned into modern day Brahmins themselves.
Oh goodness.
And they could not identify with their own past or the things that they did. So that is always a kind of a question and a kind of a problem, where because the identity itself is so strong, and the discriminatory practices that has been, that after a point you feel like detaching from that identity and creating a new self. And that's another kind of, and that's why this is an ongoing kind of a discussion. While it empowers you at some point, but why this empowerment for a majority of people has also been detachment from their own thing. And it is a, because the discriminatory practice is so entrenched that sometimes it feels like you better not speak who you are. You do not talk about your identity. And by the time lots of people, and I've seen people hiding their identity, and people not wanting to talk about their identity, even if they are powerful, even they are at privileged position, even they have got really everything. And lots of times the second generation, they have been lived a sheltered life, that they always think about belonging to a certain class, a rich class, never about a caste. So these are the kind of issues, again, which I feel comes in strongly. While the points, I agree with points with Mudit is pointing, but I've also seen closely how these impact, or how sometimes people do not take that.
Yeah, this kind of appeasement politics happens. I mean, the upper privileged culture does end up appropriating, I don't know, subaltern culture.
Yeah.
to make
Well,
himself
yeah,
seem cool. Yeah.
I agree with you, Mudit. I'm just putting this
Yeah.
because this is one thing which lots of people try to discredit others, and
Yeah.
I'm just putting it that yes, that is also something, but this is a
Yeah.
very
I'm just saying that.
minuscule aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, one bad figure does not discredit the
Yeah.
whole policy.
Yes. Yes. It doesn't
Like,
discredit.
if we
Yeah.
see it that way, then and it's a good argument for all of us to take forward. Also, that if we think that one corrupt, marginalized person is bad, then that way we can frame many arguments. For example, Adani is so corrupt, so rich, a billionaire. So then, do we go ahead and say that okay, all baniyas are corrupt now? Yeah.
You're missing my point. You're missing my point. I'm just saying that
Hmm.
the discrimination is so strong that
Hmm.
identity or putting your identity outside is something at times people really fear the repercussion, the backlash,
Yeah.
things, even if you are at a powerful position. And that's why
Hmm.
lots of times that lots of people think that once you get the power, you can fight for your own people. But then
Yeah.
people are still quiet because there is thousands and thousands of years of discrimination, and that kind of problem is always there. Okay, so it's not, I'm not talking about corruption, I'm
Hmm.
talking about the identity crisis which anyone who's discriminated against. Okay, and
The
even if they
structures
are
are just so powerful that you
yes,
cannot fight against them.
like
Yeah.
I'll just tell you, I was sitting with this was when I was in school in my class 11th, and a very good friend of mine, he called me to for dinner for lunch at his place, and his father, who was an IAS officer, and we were talking about some other IAS officer, another classmate of ours, and he said, oh, IAS officer hai, wo to bhangi hai. It was like he's an IAS officer, he's so his IA being that person, an IAS officer, was of no concern. His
Yeah.
caste became the thing to ridicule. We were talking about something positive, and suddenly an IAS officer, this was an
Hmm.
IAS officer talking about another IAS officer, Indian Administrative Service officer, and suddenly putting that person down just because he belonged to a certain caste. So
Yeah.
at times that fight within that structure is so problematic, and that's why when you see the latest government's decision of lateral entry and
Hmm.
bypassing the reservation system, it is all about that the so-called, even that small power that people from the reservation class had, or through reservation, not reservation class, but through reservation who had, they want to even steal that or want to get their own people. So it's a non-stop thing. But I agree with Modi, but I thought there are these kind of
It has to
discussions,
be
and this was,
nuanced. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
and this is
It's
the
very nuanced.
identity crisis, and lots of times the hiding of identity because of the backlash or the kind of problem
Structure.
or how power structure really puts you down. So my thing was that, not about corruption. It then
No, I
doesn't
get
have
it. I'm sorry. I
anything to do with corruption. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
I
sorry. I
think
misunderstood.
no,
Yeah.
no. I was just going to say, I thought we were going to resolve all the questions today, or the problems today, but I think we're gonna have to end pretty soon at the point of promising that we will reconvene and perhaps peel away some of the layers and try to come up with more answers and more discussions. Karishma and Farhat, if you have any pressing comments, otherwise we will say goodbye.
Thank
No,
you
just
for such a
thank
lively
you.
discussion. I think it's just a start for a lot more,
Exactly.
many to come.
Yes, that's right. Thank you so much. I just got a glimpse into your brilliant minds, and I wish to know more. And I'm sure our viewers are sort of sending their praises and compliments in as well. Vikrant, do you want to have the last word?
I think we have said enough,
Okay.
and saying that, I would say firstly, thanks to you, Noreen, for
Mhm.
running this show, and secondly, we need more of these kind of discussions. Maybe next time, there's so many strands to it, and as Farhat also talked
Exactly.
about,
Yes.
women reservation and issues that is
Yes.
happening in Australia.
That's
Not for
right.
me, but for others, I think it's a very important thing for me to listen to what Farhat and others who could contribute to that.
Karishma, hopefully you've got some more ideas for papers and podcasts.
Well, well,
Lovely.
always the community is very yeah, great.
Good.
And
Excellent.
also a
Thank,
real
yep,
privilege to be a part of it.
beautiful. Thank you so much, all of you. Have a
Thank
great
you.
night, and
Thank
we
you.
hope to cross paths again very soon. And thank you to all our viewers. Good night.
Thanks, Vikrant. Thanks,
Night.
Bharat. Thanks,
Thanks.
Karishma.